All right, today we are sitting down with Eric Woodward. We're way up in northeast Michigan, just south of the 45th parallel in Ossining, Michigan. Eric is a dairy farmer, organic dairy farmer, and we're going to sit down and talk to him a little bit about TB, tuberculosis in cattle and the deer, and the effect on his farming operation and just the way that's affected the way things work around here. But before we jump into that, Eric, you just want to give us a quick introduction of who you are, farm size, family, and all that kind of stuff.
Eric Woodward. I farm here in Ossining with my wife Janelle, and we have 5 children that are from age 20 down to 5, and all involved with the farm as well. We milk about 60 cows here and have been shipping milk with Organic Valley since 2014.
So you switched over to grazing, but you were grazing, or you switched over to organic, but you were grazing before you switched over to organic, correct?
Yes, we've always grazed, been pretty grass-based operation. So the transition to organic was not a huge hurdle for us. A lot of it was things we already were doing in our day-to-day operation at that point in time.
But I know we'll get into TB here in a second, but I know that your transition was a little interesting because that was the year after a drought, correct?
We started to transition our herd in 2012, and we had just a massive drought in our region that year. Feed supplies were extremely short. By the time we had culled out a third of our cows just trying to make it through transition, and it just wasn't working. And to import hay from out of state, we were looking at a huge amount of money versus I had a neighbor who had sold his dairy herd and basically said, come get the rest of this feed out of the silo, and gave it to me. So we stopped our transition at that point. It was a very tough decision, but got us through to the next year, and at that point build our feed inventories up. But with our land already being ready to certify, summer of 2014 we sold our conventional dairy herd and bought in 2 organic herds. So we basically just swapped cows over a few week period and went straight onto the organic truck that way. So it was a little different way of doing it to accomplish the same end goal.
Mm-hmm. But I know that was quite the decision to have to make to all of a sudden you're almost 2/3 through the transition?
We were two-thirds through. It was a tough decision, but there was just no forage to be found anywhere. The feed department at Organic Valley tried to help me find feed. I needed 2 semi-loads of hay, and the closest stuff they could locate for me was in Iowa. And for the amount of money we would have had to borrow just to make it through versus, deciding to pull the plug and, wait to fight another day. It was a tough decision at the time, but I think in hindsight was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. But now on the truck, now been shipping for 4 years or close to 4 years now, 4 years this next year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And been learning the ropes, and then also dealing with local issues, which is where we can get into tuberculosis and all the, I guess we can just start with TB. We're in a TB zone. Basically, what does that mean?
There's 4 counties in northeastern Michigan that are the, shall we say, hot spot, the core zone for bovine tuberculosis. TB was found here in the mid-90s, I believe around 94, 95, in the white-tailed deer. It might be a cattle disease, but the difference is we are the only area of the country that has an active prevalence of TB in a wildlife population. We have a lot of white-tailed deer here, and last numbers I've seen is about 2 to 2.5% prevalence rate of bovine tuberculosis in the wild deer. So it's then crossed over into cattle herds.
How is it spread?
Spread through saliva is the main thing. Saliva, nasal secretions. The big thing gets to be is anywhere where deer feed, it can be left behind. And the bacteria that causes TB is extremely hardy. It is a double-walled cell. It can live through just about anything. So direct sunlight is about the only thing kills it. So if you graze cattle in an area where deer had been overnight, you take the risk of picking that up and infecting your cattle.
But even in feed, correct?
In feed, yes.
Not even grazing. I mean, it doesn't have to be from grazed ground.
In stored feed even. They've been doing a lot of research with baleage. Baleage is pretty widespread, common way of storing hay in this area. And with baleage fermenting at a lower temperature than, say, silage, they're finding that the bacteria can live in that feed even after it's been wrapped for up to 30 days.
Jeez.
You mean, so if you take baleage where the deer were grazing, there's a chance that you have TB in your baleage when you feed it the following winter? Like, it'll live that long, or will it?
That's been the debate. There's no hard... Right now, I know they have proven 30 days.
Okay. Because it takes about 30 days to get the fermentation process done. So it's living through the fermentation.
It's living through it.
Wow.
Corn silage, they're finding it kills it a lot quicker. Not sure if it's because corn silage is more acidic or just because it's fermenting at a higher temperature. Dry hay, something as simple as maybe you make your round bales and they sit in the field a week before they get picked up and hauled home. That bacteria can be living on the side of that bale if you have deer come in at night and are, feeding on those bales. Or
is a farmer allowed to try to eradicate the deer on his farm?
Cattle producers can get disease control permits. They like it when we use them, but yet to get them can be a pain sometimes too. They're not real free with handing them out, but yet they promote you to use them. So
just to want to give a little bit of background where we're at. We're in Northeast Michigan. It's there's a lot of national forest. It's not a big industry area, so jobs are a little more sparse. And the reason I'm saying all this is because deer hunting is a big part of the economy around here. And so,
yeah, actually, these four core counties, Alpena County being the county I live in, and also being the county that is the hottest of the hot, so to speak, is mostly privately owned land, and it's large hunt clubs. Some of these are properties of 5,000 to 10,000 acres, some of them. Large, privately held hunt clubs, and deer hunting is a huge revenue in the area. It's, I would say opening day of deer season rivals Christmas in most people's eyes around here.
But that is part of what the problem is around here with trying to take care of TB. Now, I know the state has come in and put on regulations on you as a farmer, as a cattle producer. What are those regulations currently?
To date, there's been, I believe, about 70 cattle herds that have tested positive for TB. Throughout the years, the way it was handled has changed. At one point, they would totally depopulate herds. I mean, basically, if they found you had TB, all your animals were taken. Or there were some test and remove options where you were under very test-stricting and your movement restrictions. Basically, you just couldn't move cattle until you cleared this. Now, as the money situation has changed, there's no more complete buyouts. You are quarantined and put into a test and remove option. All herds are tested annually. Plus, if you want to sell any cattle for any reason other than direct slaughter, they have to be tested to be moved. So if you were to sell feeder cattle or breeding stock or anything, they have to be tested before they could be moved off the farm.
And is that testing, the farmer has to pay for that testing?
No, the state does pay for the testing.
Okay.
It's at no cost to the farm.
But you can sell direct slaughter. I take it with both deer hunting and with cattle, you can eat meat from positive.
Yes, they with the deer hunters, they've told all along there's nothing wrong with eating the meat from the animals. They strongly encourage hunters to turn the heads in to be tested, just so they can keep a handle on where and how many deer are harvested that are showing positive, but it's pretty minimal, the number that are actually tested.
And how does bovine tuberculosis progress? Like if a cattle or a deer were to get it, what would
it is a chronic disease that infects the respiratory system and will eventually go into the lymph glands of an animal. Once it's severe enough, it will kill the animal. It is highly contagious. Some herds that have had it start, I mean, it can spread like wildfire potentially. You know, if you have tightly confined animals, especially, have been the herds that have had the highest prevalence rates. And it is contagious to humans, you know, if the disease progresses enough, you know, to an advanced stage. And that's why they test, you know, so heavily for it. This area.
How does it affect the animal? I mean, can you tell if an animal is infected with it?
No, anybody who's had positive cattle, I mean, there were no visible signs in the cattle. You would, you know, and that's the goal with the annual testing, is that these animals are being detected long before. It's a very slow growing disease. It can actually, you know, lie dormant in an animal for years before maybe a stress condition or something that an animal would trigger it to be able to take a foothold. And that's what makes it just so hard to keep a tight handle on. And
so it actually sounds a little bit like Staph aureus in a cow, where it can lie dormant and it's not showing anything until the cow's under stress.
I would say that's
shedding.
A very good analogy. That would be a good comparison.
You know, you said in confinement is where it can spread the fastest, but that is what all the state recommends, is essentially, you know, that's where I wanted to go, especially on this farm, is, you know, grazing is limited. You can't go within, what is it?
Well, they definitely like you to stay away from woods. This area was very heavily beef cow-calf operations, and many of them have gone out because land that they grazed brood cows on was deemed to be deer habitat. You know, had too many trees, too many swampy areas, you know, too many low-lying areas, and that is the perfect conditions for the TB bacteria to live almost indefinitely on the ground, you know, where the sunlight can't kill it, where it's just almost protected there. And it's really gotten rid of a lot of the beef cow-calf producers.
So how has that affected you with requirement of grazing? And I know there's 5 other organic dairy farms and within a mile or two of your place here.
In our immediate neighborhood, the biggest thing, we had some heifer pastures that they wanted us to fence off, any areas with trees to basically keep the cattle out of them. The area where our milking herd grazes is all pretty well wide open field space, so that hasn't been restricted at this point. One of the big ones they're pushing right now is secure feed storage. They want deer-proof fences around any round bale storage, silage bags, any feed that is stored outside to be fenced to limit deer access. During the winters and nights, you know, they tend to start moving in.
And now are they going to pay for, is the state going to help pay for that? Or
there's cost share money available on and off periodically for doing these things. Right now, a lot of things are up in the air because there was 6 new cattle herds in 2016, which is more than double what is actually allowed for the state of Michigan to keep its TB-free status.
For the entire state of Michigan.
State.
And that happened in this 4-county area.
Our 4-county area is the core area, but right now there's debate whether the whole state could lose their TB-free status. The USDA has kind of stepped in, so to speak, and by the 1st of January, supposedly, we may know what the new rules are going to be, if it's going to affect the whole state or just be, you know, tighter and more restrictions for our immediate 4 counties.
it's only going to get tougher. Is basically
It's definitely, we've been told that agriculture is so small in this region compared to southern Michigan that, I mean, in my own opinion, they will throw us under the bus before they're going to, put a lot of the larger dairies and larger farms in the southern part of the state under the scrutiny that we're under. Especially just it'd be so cost prohibitive with all the testing requirements just for movement or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look out in your hay fields that you're grazing and you see deer in it, do you keep the animals out of there, or don't you worry about it? Or aren't there deer in your pasture fields?
We personally on my own farm have not had, sort of just the way we're located with the lay of the land. I don't have much pressure with deer going in. Some of the other neighbors do, and it does make a difference in where they turn cattle out into.
Have you ever had or known any of the local organic farms that have ever had TB or a depopulation of any kind?
None of the organic farms have ever had TB to date. I guess throughout the 4 counties, there's 10 organic valley farms. 6 of us are in one real close pocket here where I am. One is out kind of by himself in the next county, and then there's another small group. And at this point, none of the organic farms have had TB.
I've always been a little bit curious about that. We're biased as working in the organic industry, but it seems that possibly immune system might be less in confinement herds that are coming up with TB, and also the non-intensively grazed beef cow herds where this is showing up. Now, I don't know if there's any correlation there.
There's no scientific proof to back that. A lot of people have wondered about it. Immune function is huge. But, when you have a group of cattle of any size, sooner or later you're going to have an animal that is, under a suppressed immune system. And, no different than getting the common cold, it could be TB that's lying there ready to attack the animal system too.
Mm-hmm. So if it's spread through saliva mostly, if you look at a feed bunk, if you've got one cow with TB and they're slobbering all over the feed bunk, that's going to spread like wildfire, isn't it?
Yes, the feed bunk.
Much more so than grazing.
Water fountains, yes. Then that's why we have to do wildlife risk assessments, they're called. And we have a team comes out of state veterinarians, Michigan State Extension, Wildlife Services, and they do a complete walkthrough of your farm and pastures, just trying to help you point out areas that, things that could draw the deer to where it's going to put your cattle at a higher risk. And they have zero issue with intensively managed grazing systems because they say, the cows are in and out of there, once or twice a month, basically. You're keeping this rotation. And, chances are of the deer being in there at the same time become less than. And, during the grazing season where you do have good direct sunlight, hopefully you're having a chance that bacteria can be killed. But it's one of those things that nothing's foolproof neither. But they'll point out, maybe areas along a woods where you can see heavy deer traffic, or apple trees are a big thing they like to pick on because they're just a magnet to bring the deer closer to your farmyard.
Basically, business for a farmer in this area has gotten tougher and tougher and tougher over the years. But that's only one half of what is carrying this disease. What is being done for the deer hunters?
That's where the big controversy comes to play. They do offer, unlimited antlerless doe tags, can be purchased, but the DNR has been really apprehensive to jump, full bore into this. And the bad part is the farmers feel like they're getting pinned against the hunting population. And I know of farmers who have lost land that they rented because the owners, didn't want them shooting deer out there. And deer you could say are almost sacred in the culture around here. And when you have one example, a friend of mine who did get TB in their dairy herd, the Wildlife Services comes in and shoots a certain number of deer on that property to test them all and check for TB. And in his instance, I know on a 160-acre farm, they shot, it was like 80 deer. One of them tested positive, but that's all it takes. It's that, 2% prevalence. If out of every 100 deer, 2 of them have TB, and they're coming into your silage bags at night, or if they're, getting close to a feed bunk, and you have this bacteria that can live for so long. But at this point, to do any mass eradication of deer, no, it's not happened, and I don't think will for the foreseeable future.
And that isn't due to population not being here. That is simply due to deer hunter influence and the economics of hunting in the area. There is plenty of population.
The most recent survey done on this 4-county area is they estimated the deer population between 120 and 130,000 deer in these counties. And the biologists have said that if TB was not even a factor here, that's still a third more deer than what this area should be supporting. And when you throw the disease factor into it, you can see why this disease has been able to establish itself in the deer herd. And, a lot of farmers feel as if they take the brunt of it. They do the testing. They face the financial risk, when no matter if they do everything right to prevent their cattle from getting TB, the disease is still going to be in the area because of the deer population.
So when cattle get TB and they're eradicated, they're not sent to slaughter, they're just killed?
No, they can go to slaughter. There's, to my knowledge, one plant in the state of Michigan that has to handle them all so they can be inspected at slaughter, and the meat can be utilized. But like I said before, they're not doing whole herd depopulations anymore. It's more of a intensive test and remove. I believe
what does a farmer get paid for those cattle? Market price, or is it?
You get paid beef value.
Wow.
So it's a significant economic loss if you wind up with TB in your herd. Has it driven farmers out of this area?
Yes, there's a lot of the beef producers have gone out of business over it. Whether the restrictions on what land they could run cattle on, or the other problem has gotten to be is it's not an area with feedlots. So to sell feeder cattle, they go to southern Michigan, and a lot of the feedlots do not want our cattle anymore because they can get caught in traceback testing, it's called. If that herd up here would show up with TB, even after they had sold feeders that tested negative, that feedlot would be liable to test his entire operation after the fact. So a lot of feedlots do not want cattle from up here. Dairy replacements, it's gotten to be the same thing. A lot of downstate dairies don't want replacements from this area. Just maybe not that they're worried they're going to get TB, but more the testing that they could be scrutinized under later because some cattle came from here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really driven down the value of your cattle in this area.
Yes.
Even the ones that are TB free.
Yes, our herd, we've never had TB. We do our annual test every spring, and it's never been a problem. But to be able to market cattle, as breeding stock it's I won't call it impossible, but it's definitely a negative impact.
Has there been any TB in humans in these counties?
There was one case, it could be 10 years ago, and it was believed it was transmitted to a hunter from the deer. He cut his finger while field dressing the deer, and they believe he contracted TB that way. It was caught early, so he could do antibiotic treatments and, be okay, but that's the only case that I'm aware of.
So can you kill the TB bug in an animal, the bacteria, so it's no longer, or is it like yonis that the cow will always have?
They say there is no treatment that can efficiently be used to kill it in an animal, and a vaccine has not been developed that is allowed in the U.S.
Okay.
But there is one allowed in Europe, correct?
To my knowledge, there's a vaccine that is used in New Zealand where TB is quite prevalent. They have it there, and I believe it's a possum population, and keep spreading it. And to my knowledge, they do vaccinate there, but it's not okayed in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And it is curable in humans? Or not? It's kind of same as the animal.
To my knowledge, I really don't know a lot on the human side.
So
There's multiple strains of TB. That's the big thing. There's even avian bird TB, and as well as human TB, the bovine TB, and even the different cattle TBs. You know, they say our strain here is different from a strain in, say, Texas. They can tell them apart. You know, it's easy to tell that this TB is our local Michigan variety.
Wow. I mean, you know, when you look at organic farming and you see all the paperwork and everything that it takes to be an organic farmer, and then throw the TB into it, yet it's a whole new ball game that 99% of our farmers don't have to worry about.
No, it's kind of just this local thing, and it's changed the face of agriculture in this area for sure. And now as we look, you know, to the coming years here as to what the new restrictions could be, I mean, there's a lot of rumors flying around. There's a lot of proposals on the table. But as to say what the hard facts are going to be, everybody's sort of up in arms waiting and wondering.
And I know it's just, not saying that this is what's going to happen, but if things progress, what is the nuclear option for this area?
The nuclear option, the proposed things would be that no live cattle can leave these 4 counties. Anything you sell would be essentially slaughtered direct. To sell even young bull calves, they would have to be tested twice on 60-day intervals. So you essentially wouldn't even be able to sell a bull calf as a week-old calf. They'll all be 4+ months old by the time you could sell them. And then they still have to stay in the 4-county region. The same thing with cull cows. They would have to all go slaughter direct. You know, and these are just options that are on the table. It's not, you know, hard law and fact yet, but it definitely is making people try to reevaluate how they could run their operations as some of these rules would, you know, could clamp down potentially.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not detectable in milk?
I believe only at very advanced stages. The animal would be to the point that she is physically sick looking to where it would ever be in the milk.
It would almost be nicer if you could see a deer and, whoa, he's obviously got TB. You know, it'd be easier than you don't know.
Now, I know in the deer and as well as the cattle that have been tested, you know, most of them have no visible signs. And it's until they check the brain or the lymph nodes that they can truly tell that the disease was even there and established. It hadn't gotten to an advanced enough stage yet to be physically visible.
And I know I've touched on the economic side a couple of times, but I'm just kind of curious on, and I know it would be your own speculation, but deer hunting is a big economic driver, but there is, obviously there's economic value in farming, but because of the restrictions, there are people that are going away from farming or deciding to not come here and even bother with starting a farm because of all the restrictions. Do you think the value that deer hunting brings versus the loss that has been brought due to the regulations on agriculture offsets, or are, I know you're biased as a farmer, but
I definitely would have a bias here, but if in the conventional dairy world, just a rule of thumb is that every 300 dairy cows bring $1 million into the local economy. And when you start multiplying that effect with the dollars that just the local dairy and beef producers here do spend locally and do keep in this local economy 365 days a year versus, the revenue that's maybe generated during a month in the fall of deer season. I think a lot of times the value that these farms bring to local communities is overlooked in comparison.
Mm-hmm. And you just don't have a strong enough. Do you think it's not a strong enough voice for the farmer? Or?
There's definitely not a strong enough voice. I mean, when you try to bring it into the political light, there's a lot more deer hunters voting than there are farmers voting, and it I think has some sway in that that way. It just makes it a real struggle. I mean, I'm close personal friends with people who have lost their cattle herds to TB, and the economic loss of going through that is it either puts them out of business permanently or cripples them for years until they can resume business as usual. It's just a long uphill battle after you go through that. And most farmers here, I think, accept the fact that farming here, this is a risk you take, but sometimes as the rules change and new rules get put in place, you're not sure how they're going to affect you as well. So I don't know, it's definitely something on the forefront of most cattle producers' minds.
Mm-hmm.
So when you bought this farm, was this already a quarantined area?
Yes. I relocated into this area 14 years ago, and from the Thumb area of Michigan. And at that point, we called and tried to talk to as many people because we just didn't know much about TB. And I called the Department of Ag in Lansing and just really tried to find out if it was a major concern or not. And 14 years ago, I was told by one person that within 5 years it would be gone because they had it all under control. And 14 years later, it's just as big as ever. So,
but they don't feel like it has actually grown the percentage. Like they feel it's contained pretty well.
Well, the prevalence rate, kind of might go up and down a little bit. We've gone a couple of years without any new cattle producers, being found with TB. And then in 2016, you had, 6 of them. So and that had coming off a couple of really harsh winters where there was noticeably more deer getting into people's stored feed. So it's one of the reasons they really push the security of stored feed areas. You get a hard winter and deer are going to go looking for something to eat. And, if access to your silage pile is the easiest, that's where they're going to be.
Mm-hmm. So have you had to take any of those measures on this farm as far as protecting feed or?
We build a hoop barn that we store the bulk of our dry round bales in. And our baleage bales are all wrapped immediately, next to the house, right in the yard, and we're looking at possibly having to fence that in. We've never had deer pressure to that point. It's just not a natural channel, just the lay of the land, basically, where my stuff is. But there's other farmers who have definitely had to build fences because they just couldn't keep the deer away from their stored feed areas.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, your freezer better be full of venison.
Not too many deer have a chance if they get seen in our fields.
Now, is a farmer with the permits to kill the deer that are on their farm, can they do that year round, or is that just in season?
No, if you have the disease control tags there, you can use those year round. But for a lot of farmers, it gets to be one more job that they feel is dumped on their shoulders. How many deer do they want to shoot? How many people do they want to talk into going out to shoot these deer? And a lot of neighbors are not for this. If you get seen, shooting deer in May and June, you have a lot of neighbors who are, these are the people you have to live next to every day or possibly rent land from, and they're not in favor of it. So a lot of farmers are cautious as to when and how they use them just to keep peace in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a community. I mean,
it
is a very tight-knit community too, and to try or to upset it over deer seems kind of crazy. but it's also affecting your livelihood as a farmer. And, one thing, with all these regulations in place, I know you said 14 years ago they said it wasn't going to be a thing in 5 years. So is there any end in sight? Is there any positives that is, pointing in the direction of, hey, we'll have this taken care of sometime soon?
No, I don't believe so. When you look at, the prevalence rate in the deer population has kind of just maintained. It could go up 0.5% or down 0.5%, but it's just at kind of a steady low level. And, the number of cattle herds popping up year in and year out, about the minute you go a couple of years without any new ones, you get a slug of them all at once. So I don't, in the foreseeable future, see it going away.
Now, I know one thing in talking to you is that you have some friends up in the UP, and they deal with wolves up there. And
the Upper Peninsula of Michigan has a wolf population that's grown steadily over the years, and some people I know up there have volunteered to export them down to us. And I think it could help with the deer population, but I don't see the DNR going for that one anytime soon.
No.
So the wolves, were they reintroduced in the UP, or are those native?
They are native wolves that migrated in from Minnesota and Wisconsin into the Upper Peninsula.
So they just need to run across the bridge and they'd be here.
A few have came across the ice in the winter. There's been, a couple found in northern lower Michigan, but no established population to my knowledge.
Well, and I know the only reason I bring that up is because, reintroducing wolves, even though UP might be a native population, but I know in Wisconsin they reintroduced and protected wolves for quite a while, and there's other areas that are looking at reintroducing wolves, and there's always controversy over that, and I always think of this area when I think of reintroduction of wolves. I mean, it isn't popular in other areas because it takes care of a deer population and also a cattle population. But I think if you had wolves, you might be able to sacrifice a cow or two if they took care of a deer population.
That's a pretty touchy subject.
You might not want to answer that one since you live here.
I'm definitely not going to say I'm going asking for them, but sometimes the thought is intriguing if it would keep the deer population in check, and most farmers are deer hunters as well. It makes it a hard controversy for them. It's not that they're out to eradicate the deer. I mean, most farmers I know enjoy deer hunting. They enjoy seeing the deer. But when you have this disease that's harbored there that interferes with your livelihood and the growth potential of your farm and your family, it definitely is, gets to be two-sided as to how it should be handled.
Mm-hmm. And when you look on the hunter side, they have a lot of influence, and they might only be in this area for a month out of the year. That it's really, they're only aware of the TB for that month that they're hunting, where the farmer is surrounded by it all year long. So it's kind of unfortunate that the people who have spent the least time around it have the most influence.
Definitely. That's been one of my arguments when we do our wildlife risk assessments and have the team of state veterinarians and extension here is they want to keep pushing what we need to do to protect our cattle. And I asked them outright, I said, how many hunt clubs and deer hunters have you had call and say, hey, there's a disease in our deer, what can we do about it? And they laughed at me because it's just not viewed as a problem in the hunter world. Because a few extra deer, if they have advanced TB, they just won't survive the winter. And it's just not viewed as a problem to them. And maybe rightfully so, but they're not taking the economic loss from it that the farmers are facing.
And the other hard part is that those people that come in for a month, a year, they may help bolster the economy for a while, but they're not a part of this community either.
No, I mean, you do have your definite local deer hunter population, but there's a lot of this land and hunt clubs are owned by people, from downstate and out of the area that, they've owned land up here for years and enjoy coming up here. It's a beautiful area, a wonderful place to live, but their main economic revenue is from somewhere else, and this is their playground. Yet these deer, which are carrying this disease affect us every day.
And when you look at, you touched on it earlier about the farmers stimulating the local economy and the community. I don't think there's anything that stimulates local economy like a farmer that's making money, because a farmer that's making money, their money is spent here, where the farm is, at the local implement dealer, all this, where a hunter is not going to stimulate the local economy on the same scale as a farmer.
Definitely.
But it's still that month. That month is a boom. It's kind of like
a boom for a lot of local
fireworks
businesses.
store. It's really busy. At the end of June.
I mean, we sound like we're definitely on the side of the farmer, and I'm sure there's arguments for a deer hunter that they'd come back at us with. What would, if you were talking to a deer hunter outside of having deer available, I'm sure that's probably the biggest part of their argument. What would they say? They don't need to do anything?
Well, as myself and other farmers have tried to, gap this bridge and, make it a united front between the farmers and the hunters. And one of the things that they have found, the greatest number of TB positive deer are mature does. They live the longest, therefore they have the greatest chance of picking the disease up along the way. And if more hunters would just shoot antlerless deer, I know a lot of them feel like if you shoot the does, you're getting rid of next year's crop. But the deer population is very strong to where I believe you're going to see just as many deer and possibly, more larger bucks. Some hunt clubs have proven this, where they've, on large tracts of land, tried to follow the recommended practices here and thin out the doe population. And they say they're getting the biggest bucks now they've ever gotten, and they still have a large, healthy deer population. Just need to keep the older, mature does who are most likely to carry this, thinned out from the herd.
Well, it sounds like that might be a natural ally. There is somebody that has gone through that, and it's called deer management. It's not just deer growth. I mean, that's the key here, and it seems like that could potentially be an ally, is those hunt clubs that are practicing those that deer management technique, and then getting together with the farmers to try and spread this, that, hey, this is the best way to move forward for everybody, rather than just pitting everybody against each other.
And I know the county has offered a hunter access program to where, any farmers who essentially, they lease out hunting rights, but it's available to anyone. They're paid I don't know the rates, but it's a small percentage per acre, and it opens it up to hunting to anyone who wants to go in there. And farmers are open to let hunters come in and try and harvest some of these excess deer, just as preventative measure to try and keep the disease under control.
When Brian mentioned to me that you have TB up here, I had never heard of TB in dairy herds. Never had any of that stuff at home. We have a healthy deer population, but I don't think we're even close to what you are here.
Well, like I said, it is the only area in the country where it is established and ingrained in a wild population. There's been some other areas. I know in Minnesota a few years ago, a very small area, they found some TB positive deer, but it was more like on a township type basis. It was a very small regional area where they were able to go in on, I believe, more publicly owned lands and get rid of the deer in that one small area. Where here it's a larger amount of land that is privately owned, and it's just kind of hung here for years.
And if you go on to private land and start eradicating deer, it is not going to be pretty.
Oh, there could be World War III over that one.
Well, I certainly hope, and we'll be keeping our eyes open on what the new restrictions are going to be coming down the line, but we certainly hope that something can get figured out, and it doesn't affect your livelihood like it definitely has a few other farms in this area. But yeah, thanks a lot for talking a little bit about it, and we may be back once hopefully the nuclear option doesn't come, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, thanks for sitting down with us today, Eric.
Okay, thank you.